Everybody,
Yeah.
attention for Wells, please.
Yeah, thanks. This is a topic that has turned up over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter how many years you've been turning, the whole business of how moisture affects wind movement and how we deal with that as turners is a topic that is always in the wind. And people that are new to the club or new to turning are discovering the same things that some of our elder statesmen have. I include Jim and me among the elder statesmen. Tom, you're almost there. But this is a subject that I think is almost unique to turners for the way we use it. So we're going to talk about science in understandable ways. There's only one formula in this entire slide deck. And it's one you already know. But I think the important thing is if we understand why things are happening, it's a little easier to intervene, either prevent them or cope with them. So it's going to have a scientific thread through it with an emphasis on practicality and plain English. And at the end, we're going to get really practical and hear from three people that really understand practicality to the core, Rafdan and John. So Martin has been fond of reminding us at least twice a year that woodworkers take round things and make them flat, and wood turners take flat things and make them round. See, Martin, I do pay attention. But the thing that's more important than the flat versus round is that woodworkers use dry boards to make what they do, virtually always, whereas, let's see, where we usually start with wood that's either wet or still damp. We hardly ever start with fully aged dry wood. In fact, it's a novelty when we do. So moisture is part of wood turning experience, and we're going to spend a whole lot of that. Roy's going to talk about some spalted tan oak that he's going to bring and share. It just turns out to have this picture. That's some of Roy's tan oak on the right-hand side before it got spalted. And you'll find out later that tan oak has one of the highest coefficients of contraction of any of the woods that we have around here. I didn't really know that, but it does explain why some of my clatterblanks split. So we're going to get to that. Also going to pay homage to our Bruce Hoadley, who I call the Bruce, hearkening a little bit of Scottish heritage. This is a book that I regard as probably the single most important bit of reading that any woodworker can do. He's a PhD wood scientist. I am not a wood scientist, and I've used a whole lot of his material to support this talk. But the information in there, I'm on my third reading, and I keep discovering new stuff every time I go through it. And I want to thank John Wells specifically for telling me exactly what I just told you. Changed everything for me. So you can buy this book. I've got a copy of it here just to prove that it's not just a photograph I got off the internet. And we'll talk about that. And looks like, there we go. All right, the Bruce. The next few slides are going to go really fast because they're not really content. They're just supposed to, keep you interested. But we start with the living tree, which is pretty much created by four different things: air, sun, earth, and water. And we're going to be talking almost exclusively about the water today. So look at trees. I mean, they have all these different shapes. They're shaped by the hardships of where they grew up. And that, in turn, shapes what we get from the trunk when we cut it open and start to turn it. They grow fast, they grow slow, they grow tall, they grow short. I've seen some little crooked ones and some big crooked ones. Really interesting wood inside those places. This is one, I said bulgy and bumpy. I'm not referring to the individual standing on that pearl. She's trim and intelligent and graceful, but the tree. They've been, one of the things, the trees mostly are able to move. They don't break terribly easily. Some bend more. They'll all break if they get stressed enough. This is a Santa Cruz tree. It leans to the left. I know that there are trees that lean to the right, but that's not the majority approach in this room. They get kinky, and sort of everybody does sort of in private, I suspect. But they bloom, they drift, they reflect because they're in Santa Cruz. They learn from their environments. Eventually they die, they burn, and as Roy can tell us, after they burn or after they die, they turn, and that's where we come in. Through this entire process, through the growth of the tree and the changes in shape and all of the adversity that trees endure, they keep moving. And my exhibit, The President's Challenge, is one that I'm just going to hold up. Sometimes they move a lot. This used to be a perfect platter blank, and it's my Salvador Dali platter blank.
Yeah.
So I think it'll qualify for the doll thing if you show me some for you. Yeah, all right. Okay. The fundamental thing is that moisture drives all of this. There's practically nothing in wood that's not moisture driven. And here we go. So shall we dive into the discussion? This is not me, by the way. This is a better looking, stronger person, but it's a good photograph. Looking down the trunk, this is where we're going to start. We're going to go way past. This is elementary, and you all know it. Just the anatomy of a crosscut. The center pith, and this is a piece of Doug fir, is a nasty thing in some woods because it generates stellite cracks and it doesn't hold screws very well. But the thing about looking down the trunk here is that if we could zoom in with a microscope and look at it, it's really a bundle of straws. We're looking right down the end of those straws. And pretty much everybody knows this. These straws are filled with air. They're empty. They're quite light. But if we imagine that the tree is a sort of a waterproof base, if that's the bark, and inside we've got all these parallel straws, we could fill that vessel with water. That would fill the tubules, the straws, but it would also fill the space in between the straws. And this is going to be my analogy for the tree, and it's a pretty good metaphor. It's not perfect, but this is our tree, and we're going to use this concept of water in between the straws and water inside the straws for a lot of the discussion. There are two reservoirs of water in wood. There's the water in between the cells, and that's called intercellular, it means between the cells, and intracellular, also called bound water. That's water that's inside the straw, and as you can imagine, the stuff inside the straw is less mobile than the stuff that's in between. So keep this in mind. We're talking about two reservoirs of water, and they both change, and they both happen on our watch. I'm going to use a metaphor that was in Hoadley's book, which is the sponge. So, here's a dry sponge. If I put this in a basin of water, squeeze it a couple of times, it will absorb and be fully saturated with water. If I pull it out of the basin and put it down, it's going to make a little puddle. Some of that water is going to drain out right away. If I squeeze it, I don't have to squeeze it terribly hard. There's going to be a big gush of water that comes out. However, if I look at the shape of that after I've squeezed it, it's the same size that it was. It doesn't change shape when it loses that free water. And it's still damp. You can put it on your face, you can clean up the stovetop, it's still damp, it's still holding water. That's the intracellular water. If I take that now damp sponge and I put it on the windowsill in bright sunlight, it's going to shrink. In fact, it's going to look like a potato chip or an orange peel if I don't do anything else. And that shrinkage is what happens when you lose the intracellular water. So the sponge, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's not bad. It's going to help us as we get through the talk. Okay, so wood loses water in two phases. Stage one is the free water. The water between the cells drains out. Stage two is the water inside the cells leaves. And that's it. We're going to talk about the two phases, and then we're going to talk about how we practically use that knowledge when we're working with a piece of wood. Okay, so when you cut down a tree, the wood is fully wet. And I don't know if you've ever been there when in the spring when you cut down a standing tree, but you put a wedge in on one side, then you cut the other, and it falls towards the wedge. When you cut that wedge, the water comes out in a gush at times. I mean, it's like watching a cow pee. I mean, it's just a lot of water just drains right out of the tree. What drains out right away, it's not finished yet. If you take that and you try to split it with the maul and you hit a freshly cut round with the maul, it's going to spin and it oozes. There's a lot of free water when a freshly cut round is put in front of you. This is something that everybody knows who's actually cut down trees and tried to move it. The water's heavy. A freshly cut round is almost half water, sometimes more, depends on the species. But just as an example, they're written up here. If you have a 12-inch diameter log that's 18 inches, kind of standard for a fireplace. When it's fresh, it weighs about 75 pounds. That's something that's a little heavier than I want to lift with things going on lately. But the weight, the volume of that goes up according to the square of the radius. So you take one that's double that size, it's going to weigh almost 300 pounds, which is not something you should try to lift. The person in that picture, on the other hand, had no trouble with that redwood trunk because he was younger and he was a lad of legend. So free water leaves the wood that we cut, but it varies a great deal. Some woods hold onto the water quite jealously, and others just yield it in a hurry. And I think we're going to talk about a specific example that this club has. And John Wells, we're going to feature you here. In the fall of 2019, a sycamore tree was growing on these premises, and it needed to be taken down because I think it was threatening something. Well, so this is what it looked like. This is Ahab on the whale, only it was this was the sycamore trunk. What we learned, what a fair number of us learned for the first time, is that wax sycamore yields free water like crazy. And let's see, let me go back to that. Bill Arnold set up his shop. It was raining in there. He had to hang blue tarps and he still got soaked. So sycamore has nearly twice the water content of most of the woods that grow around here. It's juicy, but it also, the water flows out really easily. So when it's spinning around, man, it just spreads water everywhere. Well, it's not that way with all species, but it certainly was for this one. Most species yield free water quickly compared to the bound water, but not as fast as sycamore. This is black acacia, and when the free water is draining out of hardwood that we've cut, or softwood, we have a little time. Why do we have that time? We have that time because when the free water is draining, the dimensions of the log don't change yet when it's just free water that's draining. All of those rigid tubules with cellulose walls that are lined up like parallel straws are full of water. And those determine the length and the width of that log. So when the free water drains, the log is still the same size. It hasn't started to split yet. It's not starting to shrink yet. This can go on for a couple of months. In the summer, a little faster than the winter. But eventually, the free water is gone. And that happens when they reach something called the fiber saturation point. I had to read the book several times before I actually remembered this, and then I typed it out a couple of times and spelled fiber wrong. Now I remember it, but When the free water is gone, the moisture content of a log, when you measure it with the meter, is going to be somewhere 27, 28, 29, 30% moisture content. It differs by species a little bit. That's going to be true for everything we talk about. All of the water that's left in that log is bound water. It's water that's inside the cells. And this is when the mischief starts to happen. Okay, so we all know the philosophy according to St. Jerry, that just when life looks like easy street, there is danger at your door. When we start going into the phase where we lose bound water, this is where the danger is. Actually, it's an opportunity, but it's where the shrinkage starts. And thank you for reminding us that some philosophies cross disciplines. So bound water. The intracellular water does leave the wood. It doesn't like to leave it through the side of the straw. If you want to use a straw to move fluid, you suck on the end of it. You don't try to suck it through the wall of the straw. So the water does typically leave through the longitudinal ends. That's, looking at end grain is what we're talking about. Each wood is a little different. If it's hot, if it's humid, if it's ventilated or not, that affects the rate at which it loses water, but it's going to lose the water. Okay, so when it starts losing the water, this is when wood starts to shrink. But if you've got a long log, you've got water trapped deep in the middle of it. You've got other parts of the log, the round, this firewood pile, towards the end, which are cut and they're close to the air. We're going to lose water faster from the ends than we will from the middle. I mean, it's the same thing. If you're first in line at the Safeway, you get right through. If you're way back in the line, you're dog. So this is something we all know instinctively, but it's important as we look at what happens to the wood that we're going to be using. The cut rounds check early when it starts to shrink at the end, but the middle stays fat. We're going to talk about that a little bit because this is critical. You can see this if you go to your firewood pile, and I think most of us that turn, have something that resembles a firewood pile. The ends start to check first. The whole log doesn't split yet. The ends shrink because those tubules are shrinking and the wood is compressing together, while down deep into the log, it's not moving. So wood starts to shrink and split first at the end. And we see these little radial checks. This is a piece of oak. Most wood splits along the radius rather than some other way. Why? Because if you've got a circle, let's just pick something that's circular. I found one. If we have something that's circular and wood is shrinking along the circumference faster than along the radius, something's got to give. This is too stiff. If we have to change this dimension, it's going to crack. We're going to talk about that. But this is where it starts. We're not finished with that. Water keeps leaving the wood until the moisture content inside the wood is pretty much the same as the moisture content in the air. There's a name for it. I'm going to show you one graph and one formula, nothing more. That's a promise. But when the wood has finally lost all of its bound water, it's not going to shrink anymore. It's done, at least for now. And that point is the equilibrium moisture point. We're going to find out that the equilibrium moisture point, when I show you the graph, is going to look really different in Ben Lomond in the summer than it is from Scotts Valley in the summer, than it is from Aptos in the summer. We'll explain why. Also, if you have wood that's losing moisture, it's going to lose moisture faster in a really dry environment than it is in a really wet environment. If I took a oak log from outside my house and took it with me to Death Valley, it would dry out a lot faster than it would if I took it to the rainforest, where the humidity in the air is so close to the humidity in the wood. Not much movement. Yeah.
If you took that log to Death Valley and it dried out, you check the temperature, the water, the moisture meter, and you brought it back to Santa Cruz, it's going to change again because now it's going to start calling that moisture back in.
You know, you just finished my talk. Larry, that was exactly right. But that's a couple slides down the line. Hang on. But everything you said, everything you said is absolutely correct. The log will lose moisture until it reaches equilibrium with the humidity in the environment. And that means that the tubules are no longer shrinking, those dimensions are stable, the wood's going to have changed shape because it will have shrunk. We've already talked about measuring moisture content. But it's different in different climates. And these are two places that I've been. One in the Panamint Valley, ambient moisture content's very low. Eastern North Carolina, you always feel like you're in a shower. But depending upon the climate locally depends a whole lot on what happens to the wood. And then if you do what Larry did, is to start moving it from environment to environment, the wood's not finished with you. That's a little preview. Okay. When I talk about the moisture in the air, there's a measure for that. It's called relative humidity. We've got an aeronautics professor over in the back room. So, Martin, if I need to refine this, you'll let me know, I'm sure. But air holds moisture. About the only way you can get air perfectly dry is in a very hot container like an oven or in a vacuum. Hot air holds a lot more moisture than cold air. So when the temperature changes, the capacity of the air to hold moisture changes, and that's important. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. What's also important is that at every temperature, there's a theoretical maximum amount of moisture that the air can hold before the moisture precipitates in the form of liquid and comes out as rain or dew or condensation on your windshield in the morning. Relative humidity is what you hear on every newscast about the weather. It's on your maps. It's everywhere. Relative humidity is just a simple ratio. I told you this is one formula. And that's the actual content divided by the theoretical maximum at that temperature. So this is something that we all act like we know, but it does require you knowing that moisture content changes with temperature and time. Fair enough? Okay. Well, there's another thing that we all know instinctively, and that is that the air changes faster than the wood. I love the fact that the talk is on moisture. It was raining like crazy last night. Yeah. You don't know how much it costs to arrange that. But the moisture content in air fluctuates every day, and we call that the weather. The temperature changes from day to day, and the calculation then of relative humidity, we're going to see the relative humidity is changing. The wood equilibrates with the moisture in the air, but the wood takes a lot longer to do it because the moisture has to get in through all of that structure and get in very deep. So when we talk about how moisture affects wood, we're not looking at this day to day. We're looking at this sort of month to month. We're comparing June to September, that kind of thing. So a lot of these formulas and values, we have to realize that these are averages over time. And the wood kind of modulates that. Okay, so this is the only graph, but I do have to say that according to Hoadley, who I regard as the deacon of wood science, this is the most important graph in his whole book, right there. And I'm going to point to a few things about it. I don't know, this doesn't have a laser. They don't trust pediatricians with lasers. But what it looks at is that as the humidity, Who's got the laser?
Oh, you've got it. It won't work on that board.
Well,
Well, it's, it was Larry.
It was Larry goofing around with you.
Larry, you're on my case today. Nothing's changed in the last 7 years. This graph shows something that's really important for us to know. Eric travels back and forth from Colorado, which is fairly dry, to Santa Cruz, which is fairly moist. Tommy Evaldi travels from the shores of Lake Michigan to California. It can be moist in both places, but it changes pretty dramatically. So we can look at a couple things. If I can just come up here and point at it. The column on the left, this is going to be, it's on the web, it's on the website. This is something you can all have, and you can get the book and you have your very own copy. But on the left is the equilibrium moisture content for wood. That means when the wood has lost all of the moisture that it can and it's stable. So if wood is at equilibrium moisture point, that's the perfect time to turn it because it's stable. It's not going to keep moving. On the x-axis on the bottom is the relative humidity, and you can see that in Death Valley where humidity is very low, the equilibrium moisture point of wood is very low, 2-3%. Wally, would you pass this piece around? This is a piece of Death Valley wood, and you can feel that that piece of wood has practically no moisture in it at all. Coastal Aptos, it's an environment I know pretty well. The humidity doesn't change too much when you're 2 miles from the ocean. And it turns out that our average relative humidity in Aptos is around 75%. It changes a little bit in the rainy season compared to summer, but actually not very much. So wood is reaching its equilibrium in Aptos at about 14% moisture content, which is something I can measure with my meter. If you go back to that Blackwater cypress swamp, where the relative humidity is pretty much always 90%, the equilibrium moisture point is more like 20-22%. So that wood is actually as dry as it's going to get at that point. You're not going to get it any drier. You go down to Merced in the summer, so it's not something that a lot of people do purposefully. The relative humidity is typically in the 30s, and the wood is equilibrated at around 6, maybe 7% moisture content. So when somebody says, how do I know when wood is dry? There is no one answer to that. You have to know at what point does the wood equilibrate in the local environment where you're turning. So it does change, but not too fast. Yeah.
Is this the same graph for all woods?
It is pretty much the same. There's slight variations, and you see there's a little shaded area on each other. That's called the hysteresis curve. We don't need to talk about that too much, except that wood dries out faster than it recaptures water. I'm getting to your point, Larry, I promise. It is an equilibrium moisture point. It may take longer for different species of wood to reach that point, but they all do. Okay, so now we talk about the fact that nothing ever stays the same. The tubules in wood, a piece of wood from a tree that was cut down 20 years ago, it looks like dead tissue, but it's still dynamic. It still responds to changes in moisture. Those tubules that collapsed when they lost moisture can re-expand when they get into an area where there's more moisture content. So that's going to be really important. I'm going to show you why in the next slide. In areas like Aptos, yeah.
So you're saying that the cracks will go away if I take it somewhere else?
The cracks will get better, but the wood won't heal itself because you've actually torn tissue. So you're absolutely right. Almost all of us have had wood that is cracked and made a big gap, and then when it keeps shrinking, that gap gets smaller. So that's really a good observation, and it wasn't facetious in the least. But it won't heal. You're still going to want to glue those cracks together. In a place like Aptos that has fairly standard, stable moisture content through the year, once the wood is reached equilibration, I'm pretty confident that I can turn it and it's not going to do much mischief after that. If you go to Death Valley, same thing. Moisture's always low. If you turn a piece of really dry wood and it stays dry, it's going to stay stable. New England's different. So is Chicago. New England in the summer is dreadfully muggy. Humidity's 90%. It's awful, and the wood is going to swell. Okay. In the winter, we mentioned that cold air holds much less moisture than hot air. Well, really cold air, it's 0 degrees outside, there's very little moisture in that air. If you suck that air into your house and you heat it up with central heating to 70 degrees, there's very little moisture in that air, and you're essentially creating a Death Valley climate in your living room if you live in Maine. Well, does that change things around? You bet it does. If you're in a place where the wood is swelling, so let's say you have fairly dry wood in the summer, and I should let me say that a little better. As the wood swells, as the wood accumulates moisture. So if you have, you're in New England and it's muggy outside, the wood is going to swell. How do we know that? Well, the doors bind. The doors get stuck. The wood is swelling, and anything that's made out of a board is going to be affected. In the winter, when it dries out, the axe handles get loose. The wood shrinks, and it's no longer binding against the other stuff. The humidities get loose and they leak. You need to caulk them or put a blanket over them, is the way my mother used to do it. Chair stringers loosen. Chairs get rocky and wobbly. So these seasonal changes, Larry, just what you're talking about, the wood continues to move. The wood never stops responding to moisture until you burn it up. A bowl. If I turn a bowl in Aptos, and I'm really proud of it, let's say maybe this one, I turn a bowl in Aptos and give it to a friend who takes it back to Phoenix in the summer, he's going to hear this funny loud bang on his kitchen table. There's going to be a big old split in that beautiful bowl that was stable in Aptos for years because its moisture content has changed so much. How can you avoid that? Well, any surface finish. This one's got varnish on it. Any surface finish retards the movement of moisture, so it takes longer for wood to equilibrate when you've got that barrier. It still will equilibrate, but it happens more slowly. So that's why furniture in New England, it's all got a finish on it. You don't see many raw wood stools because in the winter they will collapse, and in the summer they squeak. So we definitely want to remember that. But I've been talking about shrinkage. I haven't been very specific about that. Wood doesn't shrink uniformly. It shrinks more along the circumferential growth lines than it does along the radius. So here's my fairly crude drawing of an end cut. The radius goes from the middle out to the side. Shrinkage along the radius happens, but it's minor compared to the shrinkage along the circumferential growth rings. This turns out to be massively important for cracks. Before we talk about that and show pictures of cracks, in fact, maybe we can pass this around. This is a bowl that I was very proud of. Put it into the house and it dried out. And, did a lot of cracking. Why is it that the shrinkage along the radius is slower than the shrinkage around the circumferential growth lines? And according to Hoadley, the reason is that pretty much all woods have radial rays, medullary rays that go from the center of the tree out. In some woods like oak, you can see them with your eyes. They're dramatic. You can, all of this gaudy figure in oak are the radial rays that you're viewing. This is quarter sawn, we're looking at them right at the side. They're easy to see. Other woods like sycamore, they're there, but they're only visible when it's on a certain cut. So when we turn sycamore bowls, you always find one part of the rim that's got this kind of little fish flesh, lovely look to it. Those are radial rays you're looking to. But the radial rays keep those tubules from cramming too close together. That's the reason that wood shrinks more slowly along the radius. Along the circumference, and again, my skills with this are limited, but this is supposed to look like a whole bunch of those little straws, little tubules lined up along a growth ring. When they shrink, the distance from start to finish shrinks substantially, much more by percentage than the radius. That's pretty important. It's true. I don't think there's any exceptions about the difference between radial shrinkage and circumferential shrinkage. How much, if you want to know? Well, that's information you can get. I'm not going to plague you with this table except to show that there is a table, and for almost any wood that you're working with, you can find these values. But I'm going to point out the top in red. Virgin redwood, the coefficient of radial shrinkage, 2.6%. Incredibly low. Circumferential shrinkage, 4.4%, incredibly low. I mean, virgin redwood, when it dries out, it just doesn't move all that much. It's an incredibly stable wood. If it were just a little harder, it would be the world's best furniture wood. On the other hand, madrone, our good friend, how many people here have had eyebrow-raising experiences with madrone? Yeah, we all have. Coefficient of radial shrinkage, 5.6%. That's high. I mean, it shrinks a lot along the radius, but look at the circumference, 12.4%. So that's something that a board that was 8 inches side to side is going to shrink, as much as 1 inch, a whole inch. Well, we've all seen that happen with madrone bowls that we're really happy with, that didn't just crack little cracks, literally cracks you can stick your whole thumb through. All of that's there. Tan oak is a rather dynamic shrinking wood, and I'll make a point and a plug for Roy is that the one way that it changes is that when wood is spalted, the fibers are damaged, they're weakened. They're no longer springy the way they used to. So spalted wood doesn't shrink as badly as intact wood does. And there's an example of that you're going to want to. So I'm not going to play you with more of that, just to know that you can find that information. Yeah.
No, I'm looking at is what you're talking about here is not necessarily related to cracking. Here's my point. Look at sycamore.
Yeah.
High degree of shrinkage.
Yeah.
But it doesn't crack nearly as easy as the other woods that have the same coefficient.
Yeah.
For example, you can cut a limb in a sycamore like this big, it's not going to crack.
Okay.
But other trees will be much smaller, like
That's a crucial point.
manzanita is really horrible.
There are, manzanita, you've cut a branch, it'll leave a 30-degree crack in it.
Yep.
The difference between different species and how it handles these things is dramatic and important. And so this is not to suggest that there's a uniform approach to all woods. The variability here is there. The propensity for cracking is different with different woods. This is one that cracks like crazy. Everybody knows who this one is, right? This is live oak. It's just around, that's about a 20-degree angle that it cracked. That happened on my workbench over the space of not very long. As the circumference shrinks, something has to give, and it cracks. It's not elastic enough to stretch over the gap. Wood just doesn't do that. It's rigid. Okay, so Don is right. There's for people who turn, you're going to find there are idiosyncrasies for all woods, and that's part of the beauty of the secrets that we have. I'm going to mention just one thing here. We're not going to talk about boards. We're going to talk about bowls, but a couple words just to show why this is important. How many of you have a redwood deck? Lots. If you replace a board with a freshly wet 2x6 that you bought from Big Creek, and if that was milled 2 weeks before, You hit it with a hammer, it's gonna spit. The water's gonna come out just from the ding. It's full of water. It's gonna lose free water. Then it's gonna start to shrink. It gets sunny, it shrinks. The shrinkage goes along the circumferential lines more than the radius, and it's gonna shrink into a structure that has a little dome on it. Well, if the center pith is up, that little dome is very nice on your deck because it sheds water. You don't want to put it center pith down because it's going to shrink and it's going to make a cup that's going to collect water. It's going to be a scupper. It's going to be an algae pond. You're going to slide on it, break your hip, spend time in the hospital. Don't do that. So that's why, I'm mentioning this because we all walk across the deck to the shop or something like that. This is just an example. This is a piece, this is Doug fir. But you can see that that has shrunk in such a way that it's left about a 1-inch proud dome in the middle and a 1-inch concavity in the bottom. This is a great deck board. That's enough to shed water. If it was flipped on the other side, it's going to become a swimming pool.
Well, if it's an eighth of an inch, not a whole inch.
I'm sorry?
You said a whole inch, that's only an eighth.
And I thought I meant to say 1/8 of an inch.
You did mean to say that. You just didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the? Is it Elon Musk who's going to put little wires in that will allow us to communicate just with our thoughts instead of with our tongue?
I don't think it'll help.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So, just the flip side of that. Going back to the question you raised, Larry, if you replace that deck board with a kiln-dried piece of redwood that was actually lower moisture content than the equilibration, if it comes freshly from the kiln, if you put that center pith up, it's going to absorb water and swell, and it's going to make the scupper. So the moral of that story is you have to know what you're working with and what you want it to do. And that's important for us walking across the deck to the shop. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about boards. We're going to talk about bolts. One last complication. We talked about the difference between radial shrinkage and circumferential shrinkage. This gets more interesting because wood does not shrink vertically. If I have a 2x4 that's 96 inches long, about the most that's going to move, even with extreme moisture changes, is a 1/16 of an inch. Well, it turns out we depend on that. You do framing with the vertical boards. You don't want your house shrinking 5 or 8%. All of your pipes would break. And the electrical connections would come undone. The roof would leak. So this is important, and we're going to pay attention to that because it changes the shape of a bowl that's drying. So enough about boards. This is a hugely important topic. We could spend a lot of time talking about that. Those of us that make tables have a lot to learn from Hoagland, and the chapters in there are great, but not today. Back to bolts. If we have a nice round piece of wood like this, and we're staring right straight at it, that's the picture on the left. Let's say this were a piece of wet wood. We've slabbed it, we've cut it out and circled with the bandsaw, and this is going to be a blank that we're going to use to make a platter. If it's wet, it's going to look nice and round like that because we just took it off the bandsaw. Okay, what's going to change? It's going to shrink, and it's going to shrink into an ellipse. The vertical distance along there, the long fibers don't shrink. Side to side, it's going to shrink, and that's going to change looking at it down from the surface from a circle to an ellipse. How big a change is that? Depends on the wood, depends on the temperature, depends on the humidity, depends on a lot of things. But it's going to change from a circle to an ellipse, but it's going to be the same dimension along the long fibers as it was. Okay, looking at that, at the bottom, we can make a circle. All of us look about the opening of a bowl. That's the cool. That's where you put your salad. But the bottom of the bowl That's really important to have a perfect circle too, because that's our tenon. We want to grip it efficiently with the tenon, and it's going to shrink as well. It's going to change to an ellipse if you're lucky, but it can get really, really wonky when there's complicated grain and it's shrinking in different directions. And this is just an example of something that I couldn't make into a tenon. It's just worked too much. It's kind of a great example for President's Challenge. Okay. The contour of the wood also changes. If we're looking at the end of a bowl, we've got sort of, you can follow the gray lines around or the growth rings. Who's that? Oh, looks familiar. So you've got the homeless guy in the street. When it shrinks along the circumferential lines and it pulls these edges down, just like that board for the deck. And it's going to have a little high point here along the center, and it's going to pull down around the edge. And I say it starts looking like the prow of a boat. Now, if you look at it from the side, if it starts that way and these edges pull down, it's scooped down. All right, so we've made a boat. Yeah.
Dealing with just that one topic, a piece of wood that I got from Brown, from his drum tree. I cut a bowl that was about 16 inches out of it, fairly thin wall, and it was about 9 inches deep. So it's a pretty substantial bowl. The thing practically folded itself in half. So instead of going down, it actually went up. How do you explain that?
Well, that's whether it's pith up or pith down, it usually makes that difference.
Well, it wasn't pith off, so.
Yeah, I'm glad you weren't either. This is a ball that shrank into that dory shape. So I mentioned at the ends, it gets prowed up here. Those are the prows. And looking from the side, it's scooped out. And I kind of liked it. So I could have, and this is just another example of that. The opening for that piece of sycamore at one point was a beautiful circle, and now it's quite a long narrow ellipse, and the sides have folded in. So if we have a bowl that is shrunk in this kind of dory-like shape, we have several choices. We can chuck it back on the lathe and carve off these proud things and make it so it's a nice plane and return it to be a nice circle. That's what we usually do, because that's what people want when they want a salad bowl. They don't want a crooked one, they want a round one. When that happens, we carve these off, we lose some depth, and we also lose some horizontal dimension, but it's still a nice bowl. Anyway, I'm going to pass this around if I can. This is one that was a concept that I borrowed happily from John Wells, because you can leave it warped. Like I left this one, I just finished it by hand and just learned to love the irregularities. So we're going to finish the next just a few minutes talking about more things with bowl shrinkage. And what I'm going to ask is, I'm going to go through this fairly fast. We're going to have an interesting question and answer session after our cameos are done. So maybe hold on to those comments and enrich us when I've got more helpers here to share knowledge. Dan, I think, called this his Franken bowl. This one was went into a microwave, did it?
No, my sister soaked it overnight in water.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, love cream.
That's so, immersing it in water is a good way to change the moisture content a little faster than just waiting for it to equilibrate with the air. But it's split, and Dan fixed it. So this is one way you can fix it. You can sew it back together. Irregular grain, we love burl. We love gaudy figure. Well, all of the things we've been talking about shrinkage, whether it's nice round growth rings or a nice straight thing, we tend to like wood that's not so plain. We like the curlicue, the fancy stuff. We like bowls that show figure. When it shrinks, it's a little harder to predict. if we're gonna finish turn that and just make a nice, beautiful round platter out of it, it doesn't matter. You know, we can correct those irregularities. We have the tools, we have the know-how, we have the money, we got everything to fix that. So it's not necessarily bad, although some burls shrink and they make internal voids as the wood pulls apart. This is avocado, but it's, you know, bay laurel makes big voids in it when it shrinks, and even redwood burl will do that sometimes. Lamination. Larry, wait! Don't ask a question because I'm going to give you a plug in a second that's just going to make your face glow. Making a laminated bowl or a platter is kind of fun. It's a good way to use up scraps. And the trouble with that is if you glue those together, if they're woods that shrink and expand differently, you rub your fingers along those lines. Sometimes you'll get a little raised bump. It's a wood that shrinks less than the wood next to it. You feel an edge. It feels like the glue line is protrude. Sometimes it gets worse. Sometimes if they're not straight grain wood, if they're crooked, yeah.
That one that's blocking right there, that F-150, it's got the awning and stuff on it. Is that yours?
Yes.
Can I get it moved?
Anyway, when you're making lamination, my suggestion there is you use quarter sawn straight wood. If you like different colors, but don't use wood that some of it's quarter sawn and some of it's tangentially cut and glue them together. You can sand them and they feel smooth and beautiful, and in a few months you're not going to like it. That's important. And also don't take a laminated structure that feels perfect in Aptos to Provo to show it off because it's not going to be so great. It's going to change too much. So this is what I talk about laminations. Larry, this is you. I don't know how you even dare to do such a thing. It's magnificent. But if you had wood that had different moisture content or different ways of shrinking, it would be really hard to make a structure like this.
None of those pieces of wood are very big.
Yeah, that's the same thing,
Very
great.
nice.
Yeah.
They're little pieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how.
Well, it's pretty magnificent. Okay, we're coming down home stretch here. Crooked feet. A lot of us, when we turn a natural edge bowl, it's still moist. We do that on purpose because if it dries too much, the cambium lets go and the bark flies off and we don't make the natural edge bowl as nicely as we want. So it's frequently damp when we start. And if we've got a nice circular foot on it and it shrinks, it becomes no longer a circular foot. So it's going to wobble. So if you're making a, hey Bill, if you're making a natural edge bowl, leave a little extra foot so you can put it back.
He can't hear us.
Yeah, he can't hear. He's that fentanyl, man, that'll do it. Leave a little extra on the foot so you can sand it back to plain, or make it into a tripod. You take a carving knife or a Dremel tool or even an abrasive. You can give it 3 feet, which is a stable structure.
That'll wobble for you.
Yeah, this is a great example of a beautiful natural edge bowl.
That wobbles.
Nice. This is plain. Won't wobble.
It does wobble, a little.
Little bit? Oh yeah, so it does. Yeah.
It's character.
Great example. You can either live with that or fix it. But if you have a little extra depth here, it's easier to fix. If you're down to the nitty gritty, then you're gonna want to just live with
You can still do it.
it.
You
Okay.
only need like a
All right.
millimeter of difference.
So do we want the meeting chat? There we go.
We don't have a choice. It has to go up there.
Don't have a choice. Okay. Coming down home stretch, like I said, some woods lose moisture very slowly. Sycamore dries pretty darn fast, and it leaves you with a lot of cracked blanks. But others dry slowly. White oak dries notoriously slowly. You know, I can tell you from making barrels out of it, it takes 3 years to age a 1-inch thick white oak board. Coast live oak a little faster. One of the things that's tempting is if you've got a nice blank that's been aging for a while, and you stick the meter in it, those prongs go in about, not even a 1/16 of an inch, and it says, I'm down to 14%, I'm ready to go. But let's say it's thick. Well, I can start carving it out on the lathe, and I can start feeling that the shavings are moist. It's still moist in the middle. So when that happens, just be philosophical about it and put it back. Don't try to make something where part of the bowl is dry and part is wet. You're just asking for heartbreak. And the solution to that is make sure you always have plenty of blanks in there so that you never run too low. And we've got a way for you to do that outside that door shortly. One other little thing, we mentioned how important it is to have to know the wood moisture content. This is a piece of Norway spruce. I got a whole tree. I got about 80 beautiful future large bowl blanks, 14 to 18 inches. And I turned them and I was very happy with them. And then sap starts coming out from around the knots and comes out from along the growth rings. I can run my finger, I can feel it. I've tried to get rid of that 3 different times with acetone and paint thinner and steel wool, and it's still oozing. I say, where the hell is that coming from? It won't stop. That's because the sap is not responding in the same way as wood. Wood's hollow tubules, we're talking about a gel, and it's going to behave differently. So if you're not willing to put up with that, just, don't turn it, use it for kindling.
If you boil it for a while, about 150 Fahrenheit,
I think that's an important comment, and I'm going to get to that because it's one of 6 solutions I'm going to mention. So we want to talk, how about practically? We're going to talk about how to treat our blanks so we get the maximum yield and how to avoid certain problems. And Tom Ivaldi, the author of The Law of Ivaldi, and he's a law professor, so he should know. There are 3 ways to solve every problem in wood turning, and sometimes more. The other thing, the corollary of that is that if there are 3 ways to do it, in Santa Cruz it's probably going to have 5 or 8 different opinions. And that's us. That's why we're here. So there's 6 ways, and I'm going to fly through this because we're going to hear from experts about it in just a second. So this is intentionally very fast. The way a lot of people do it, this is my path, is I rough them out in a hurry, I seal them, and I store them in a place that has very constant temperature and humidity. It's a winery. And not everybody has one of those in the basement. And then I wait till they're equilibrated, and then I finish turning them. That doesn't work for everybody. The second one that you're going to hear about from Raph and Dan is called the water chamber. That's different from waterboarding, which is that's another enterprise. And you're going to hear about how that works. And this is something where I think one of the great virtues of this approach is that if you have a wet blank and you don't have the time facilities to rough it out and deal with it right away, it's a way you can buy some time. And that's really important for people that are working for a living, or people that just don't want to do it all at once. Something we all learned in lessons, you can take the bowl that you've rough turned, wrap it in the same wet shavings that you just knocked off, wrap it in newspaper, put it in a box or a plastic bag, and what that does is it slows down the rate of water loss from the surface, and it reduces the surface cracking.
Well,
yeah.
On number 2, you messed over that. My eyes aren't good enough for me to read that. What tell me about those?
I'm gonna, like I mentioned, I'm gonna let Raph and Dan describe that in great detail, and I'm just flying through here so that we can get to those presentations. But they're gonna talk in detail about number 2. I promise you. And if there's still a question after that, we've got a Q&A. But I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on each of these because it takes time away from these other guys. Single turning, you don't have to cure it. You can turn it really thin and know that it's going to work. And I'm gonna pass one over here. This used to be a perfect circle. And you can turn these things very thin and they'll work. But if it's thin, you don't have the liability of having a lot of moisture deep inside and very little moisture on the outside, because that's when you get the differential shrinkage and it cracks. And that's madrone, and madrone just wants to crack. So you can take that propensity to move around and use it as a virtue, and John's going to talk more about that. Other things, you can kill dry, not many of us have access to that. You can soak it in chemicals. We're in Santa Cruz, we just don't do that, at least on purpose. Talk about, you can use thermal approach, you can boil it, microwave it, you can freeze it. There are all sorts of things that some people have had success in doing. Now, a lot of people don't have a vessel in which they could put this in to boil it. Little things maybe. And the other thing, and again, John, I credit you with this bit of wisdom, is that you can let it split and say, this is a feature of the natural wood, it's a living object, this is doing, it's what it wants to do, just gotta be me, and love it. And that. Last 2 or 3 slides, we're about a minute away from the real bonus. Even wall thickness. Now, this, I think, is something that we always need to do, and we can control this. You don't want to have a structure that's really fat in the bottom and skinny up on top. It's going to shrink faster on top than it will on the bottom, and that sucker's going to crack. This is something that we can do technically that enhances our success of having a successful outcome. So when you do turn it, don't be lazy. Make it uniform all the way through. Practice at it until that's second nature. If you try and do that late, not good. Make it quick, Larry.
And when you're roughing it out like that, you still do your even wall thickness, but round over all your sharp edges, because those are good cracking spots.
Excellent point. If you have an edge like that, the distance that water has to travel from the wood at a corner to the air is very short. And it'll dry out faster along a crack than it will if it's rounded. And critical point. That's a point Larry's made helpfully, and I follow that advice all the time. Center pith. We really don't like to have center pith if you can avoid it. It's where stellate cracks emerge and the wood's unstable, and we passed something around that was just really warpy-dorpy. Here's a center pith. Jeremy, you asked about, will the crack get smaller? This crack here, before this fully dried, was big enough to stick my fingers into, and as it continued to shrink, the crack closed up a little bit. So, anyway, I could still use it to store rocks. Okay, sealing. Now, we debate about what you want to use for sealing. I've listed 3 things: the PVA glue and anchor seal, the latex paint. There's almost anything you do to seal the surface will slow down the rate of moisture migration. Just don't expect that to be a miracle. If you seal something that doesn't have even wall thickness, it's gonna split. So this is, I think it's helpful, but you don't want to get stuck with it. So now's the gravy, because we have 3 really experienced turners, and they're gonna talk about how they manage their fresh blanks. You're going to hear some different approaches and learn from it. And Raf, you got the stage.
Yeah, well, I'm no expert, but I don't pretend to be.
Oh, sure.
Okay, for that.
Ray, stand up.
Yeah,
We need
yeah.
a microphone.
Do you have a slide? Do you have the slide?
Well,
They get to stand out front.
There's my water chamber.
Yeah, give him that.
I live in Ben Lomond, so the temperature.
Great.
I'm used to it.
Yeah. Raf, I love you, my man. Yeah.
This is what I get from
No, he needs them both.
Get rid of the hand, like,
He needs them both. He needs them both.
It won't spill.
He's both.
Oh, we have so many experts, it's great.
He's the expert, and he's the other expert.
So anyhow,
Do what they say.
I live in Ben Lomond, so the temperature variations are huge during the summer in particular, and so is the humidity content. So what I've tried to do is minimize those variables, and so it was just by chance, through no research. I thought, how do I basically manage the free water versus the bound water? And I just tried to create an environment that I got lucky with. And since then, I've done a little bit more research on it and see what other people have been doing. Go to the next one, maybe. So what I do is I basically put bricks at the bottom, and if they're really wet wood, I don't add any water. The water will drain, and the free water will drain out, collect at the bottom, and it just basically slows down the process. Or the drying process. If I'm doing this during the summer, I generally put 2 or 3 inches of water, no higher than the brick, just to create the wet environment. And go to the next one, please. And that is I believe, a piece of cypress that has been in that barrel for 18 months. And I have 3 barrels that have water in it, and I'm trying now with a dry barrel with absolutely no water in it, and truthfully, they have come out as well as the ones with water. The main difference is this particular barrel has been exposed to sunlight as well as shade, and so the temperature variations, the humidity variations, going up and down like crazy. But it seems that as long as there's enough moisture in the barrel itself, it seems to be fine. The one that I have no water in whatsoever is in perpetual shade, and I've had no problems with that either. So for me, it was, using whether it was madrone or cypress or black acacia, which are the 3 woods that I use a lot. It hasn't made a difference as far as the species is concerned. So that's my 2 cents worth. It works, and I've always had more more blanks than I know what to do with, to be honest with you, as most of you probably do, and trying to figure out how to store them, and I can't turn them as fast as I'd like to, so this way it gives me more time. It's as simple as that.
So on an average, how long does this from wet
Keep the microphone back.
to usable wood?
While he's asking time duration until you're ready to chuck it back.
Like I said, I've got one here that I'm mounting this week, and that's been in 18 months.
18 months.
And it's been fine. I've kept them. If it gets in the water, then you get into some mold issues and so forth. So I try to keep it out of the water that drains. But other than that, I have not found any problem relative to the duration in the mold or in the.
Does it dry into the center of this thick piece?
Yeah, it does. It's basically trying to, as I understand it, and Wells knows more about this than I do, it's trying to balance the free water and the bound water drying in kind of at the same relative amount of time, as opposed to one's going faster than the other.
I think when you create a closed system, you get fairly constant moisture content, and it, that's really different from setting it out on the back deck. Dan, you have experience with, Dan probably processes more blanks than God, and tell us what you do. I think that goes up.
They can't
Oh,
hear you.
yeah.
They can't hear you.
Yeah. I'll be right back. Sorry.
Okay.
You don't have a can, this is plastic bag.
Yeah.
So, flashback with me back to 2017. I'm a brand new turner, never turned before actually. And my experience has been I'll never bother to go pick up less than a pickup load or a pickup load and a trailer load of wood. It's not worth it to dry it. So that's what I do. So 2017, I bring home a pickup load, throw it in the sun, leave it there for 3 or 4 months, 6 months, then I'll go cut it into blanks. And I had probably 200 blanks in my shed. Oh, great. So I would shape them, just a round cut, seal them. Oh, I'm good to go forever. No, after 6 months, these things started to crack. As Raph mentioned, you can't turn them fast enough. So I ended up, what's going on here? So I ended up giving all those away. It was a bonus to everybody in the group. So what I do now is I bring home a pickup load, I put it in the shade. If it's summer, I hose it down and put a tarp on it. If it's winter, I'll just put a tarp on it. And I'll leave it there until I'm ready to rough turn it, or not rough turn it, just cut it into blanks. So here's one that's cut into a blank. I did this the other day, piece of maple. This is going on our pickup outside if anybody wants one. It's got a little bit of pith on it, so they have to turn it down a little bit. I didn't cut straight with a saw, but. So now I'll cut it into a blank and I use, thank you, God bless you for telling me about these barrels. I got 6 of them. I hit up my guy, the garbage guy was delivering yard waste containers, and hey, could I have another one? So I've got 2 of those and 4 other garbage cans that I use, and I'll fill those up, and then I get them out, and I get them on the lathe, and I'll rough turn them. I'll just shape the outside with a tenon, and then I put it in a plastic bag. I get 10 or 20 of them, then when I'm ready to core them, I take them out, put them on the lathe, and core it. And after I'm done coring it, I spray it with a water sprayer and put it back in the plastic bag overnight. And then the next day I take it out of the plastic bag, it's all cored, all nice even thickness all the way through. Although I turn them a little thinner on the bottom now, I've learned that technique. And then I seal it with tree saver. And then I wait. And God, I'll never catch up to all the blanks that I've got. I found out I can. So I've spent 4 years just turning green wood, and I love green wood. And I'm going to start doing some dry wood. So anyway, hope you can find some wood you like today.
That's great. This looks like black locust to me.
Black locust?
Yeah.
I was told it was, no, it's well.
It's not maple. I don't think.
All right,
Yeah. Yeah.
It is very hard.
Yeah, it's very hard, and it's fabulous, beautiful wood. So you're lucky to
Black
have
locust,
access to
okay.
it. Yeah, it's okay. John, we've got the ice cream sundae of presentations now, and
Hey, no
Yeah.
pressure, right?
well, yeah.
Take the mic.
He's just limping on purpose so that we'll be even more impressed.
I wish I were true.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring you this little lapel mic, and you have to trust me. And you can use this one so that we can record, and you recognize that.
Oh. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. He wanted me to talk about once turned goals, I guess. So this is one example. You guys have seen this before. This is live oak, and this one is Madrone that came from my property after the fire. And once turning is, for me, just because I'm lazy. You can turn a bowl like to a quarter or 3/16 of an inch and leave it to dry. It'll be dry enough to finish in a couple of weeks. Okay, it dries out real fast. I do it principally with live oak and Madrone because, just like Wes was talking about, they move all over the place. I've had the same experience that was a Larry that mentioned one that just ripped itself in half. Guess it wanted to be a butterfly. Should have told me. In terms of keeping wood, I don't even have a trash can. But if you'll wrap a blanket in a plastic bag, you can keep it for an indeterminate amount of time. The water can't go anyplace. So it stays. You might get mold and stuff on the surface, but you're gonna cut and turn that away. Anyways, in doing a once turned bowl like this, you have to come back and sand it. Even if you could, as you do once turned bowl, then dry the surface like with a hair dryer, and then sand it, and it'll be real nice. But as it dries and that moisture migrates to the surface, it's going to raise the fibers, and you're going to have to go back and sand it again. So I don't even bother. I just wait till it's dried and I sand it. A pneumatic random orbit sander is a really wonderful tool for doing that. You can put it back on the lathe, turn it very slowly, so it's just going to, because like these will be wobbling all over the place, but you can keep the sander on it and get a really nice finish fairly quickly. Some are so wobbly that you can't even do it on the lathe, so then you have to hold it in your lap or something and sand it. These also lend themselves to texturing really nicely. This one's faceted, and this one's fluted. You can really see the circumferential, the outside shrinkage, circumferential shrinkage. In this one, you can see how high it is in the middle and everything. I was sort of disappointed in these, as I've said before. I had visions of something more like this or that other one that Wells passed around. And all I got was 3 nice regular ovals. So this one got fluted, another one got faceted, and then that other one that I did the whale in. So that's all I got. I will say, when I rough turn a bowl, I don't do anything to it except throw it in a paper bag for a week or two. Slow the initial drying down, then I take it out and leave it on the floor in the shop. Eventually I move it out on the shelf. That's it.
Thanks, John.
John?
Yeah.
You had said something about, in handling moisture, about a box with a light bulb in it. Could you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's my convection kiln. It's a box about this big, and it's got some styrofoam that I took out of packaging, lining the inside. It's got a light bulb in the bottom. It's got holes on the sides and the bottom, and holes in the top. So cold air gets drawn in the bottom, gets heated, and rises through. As well said, heated air holds more moisture, so it picks up moisture as it rises and goes out the top, and sucks more cold air in the bottom. And you can, I use it for drying small pieces and stuff, like little lidded salt bowls or blanks for salt and pepper grinders, and I can get them dry in a week or something. So that's a really nice little tool. It's real cheap, easy to make, cheap to run. I just use like a refrigerator bulb. It's low wattage stuff. Chair makers use them to dry out the. Let's see which way they want to go. They want the rungs dry before they put them in the mortises and the legs, and then they shrink back up, and the tenons tighten up really nicely.
Shrink up, good term.
It's one of those oxymoronic things like military intelligence.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I think this is, first of all, this was really fun and great to see the room this full. Can you put my last slide up? I think if there's any more questions, let's have 1 or 2, but we are now short on time and there's really cool stuff waiting for us.
I turn boxes. I use bone dry wood to do it. And when I hollow out the inside, remember, this is all spindle turning, so the vane is parallel to the lathe direction. Once I do that, if it's dry wood, the tensions change inside, and I find that I have to let the thing sit for a couple of days and then resurface it again because everything has changed very slightly, even with bone dry wood. I know you've talked about water issues. That's not a water issue, but it's an issue that may be relevant in some cases.
I think the quick answer to that is that there's tension in any piece of wood. If something looks solid, there's all different forces going on that are balanced. If you cut a hole in the middle of that, those are no longer balanced, and it's going to move. And this will happen overnight with turnings. Yeah. So this is, I think, the important follow-up to your question is that everything we do ourselves, and we learn to work with what we do, and you're going to learn little tricks. So there's always going to be moisture in the wood, and that's another phenomenon when you hollow it out. Yeah. Yeah. Jeremy and Tim, and then I think we better wrap up.
You never talked about stabilizing wood though.
Yeah, I don't. I mentioned that as with the chemicals, and I think that's a whole nother talk, and I didn't think that was probably going to be relevant to everybody here, so that I omitted that sort of on purpose with just a little.
Fine wells on purpose, I understand.
Yeah, but I think stabilizing wood. Beautiful, and Larry and you and a few other people are really good at that. And I think it'd be a great topic down the line.
Larry gave us a talk on that last year.
Yeah. Good point. That's the law of Vivaldi says it's 3 ways. There's more, but the talk was on moisture, so I didn't. It would be. You could spend 5 days in Provo going through this topic in the finer detail. Tim, last question.
Well, it wasn't really a question, just leveraging off that comment. Is I had a elbow or a knee of oak, and also had a little bit of a knot in it. And it was my only commission so far, but it was gold, a littered bowl. And it wasn't moisture related, but it was, the drain's going in every different direction. It wasn't quite burl. But the next day the lid didn't fit. Like, no, but my customer loved it anyway. So it's just one of those, read the wood and you expect it to move. It's
If I can comment once?
Please.
Okay. When trees are not growing vertically, but horizontally, and this is a different topic, but it relates to what the questions are. They grow in a way to hold themselves up. And hardwoods do it one way and softwoods do it the other way. One is tension wood and the other is compression wood. What they do is they'll grow, tension wood is they grow more wood on top and try to pull the branch up towards away from gravity. And the other way is more wood on the bottom, trying to push it up. It's compression wood. That puts a lot of stress in the wood, and that's where these different stresses can come from sometimes. When you look at the end of the log and you see the pith is way over to one side, and the rings are really close together on that narrow space and really far apart on the other, that's tension or compression wood, and be careful with that.
I would mention that Chapter 5 of Hardley talks in deep detail about tension and compression wood and ways to mitigate those changes. And it's a fabulous book. Costs less than your dues and will last you much more than 1 year. Really encourage you to buy it. I want to thank you all for your courtesy and attention today. Thank you.